London, 1856. Lady Zara Kensington stood rigid as her lady's maid cinched her corset with well-practiced efficiency. Through the window of her Belgravia townhouse, she could see carriages arriving for the Marchioness of Sefton's ball, an event that had occupied London's gossip circles for weeks. At 27, Zara had perfected the art of attending such gatherings without participating in the one activity that terrified her above all others, dancing. "Will you be wearing the pearl hairpiece tonight, Your Grace?" asked Hannah, her maid of 15 years. "Yes," Zara replied, her fingers unconsciously touching the scar along her right temple, a thin white line mostly concealed by her dark chestnut hair, but ever present in her consciousness. "And arrange my hair to fall just so." Hannah nodded, understanding without words. She had been there that night 12 years ago when 16-year-old Lady Zara Kensington had taken her catastrophic tumble during her debut ball. The memory still burned, her feet tangling in her elaborate gown, the horrified gasps as she crashed into a footman carrying champagne, the shattering glass that had cut her face, and worse, the tittering laughter that followed. The Duchess of Charfield, Zara's mother, had ushered her bleeding daughter home immediately, but the damage was done. London had its newest spectacle. The Morning Post had been merciless. "Duke's daughter demonstrates remarkable lack of grace." Within a week, the name "the Duchess Who Never Danced" had attached itself to her like an unwanted shadow. Though she had inherited her late father's title and estates 3 years ago, becoming a duchess in her own right, the cruel nickname persisted. "Your Grace, the carriage is waiting," Hannah said, adjusting the final pin in Zara's elaborate coiffure. Zara studied her reflection. Her deep blue gown was the height of fashion, her jewels tasteful yet befitting her station. To the casual observer, she appeared every inch the confident, wealthy duchess. Only she knew the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "Very well," she replied, donning the mask of aristocratic indifference she had worn for years. "Let us face the lions." The Earl of Fairmont adjusted his white gloves as his carriage approached the Sefton residence. At 32, Frederick Xavier had only recently returned to England after years abroad, managing family interests in India and the Americas. Tonight would be his first appearance in London society since inheriting his title from his uncle 6 months prior. "Are you certain about this, my lord?" asked his companion, Lord Thomas Milbrook. "Lady Sefton's gatherings are known to be quite competitive. Every mother with an unmarried daughter will have you in her sights." Frederick smiled, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. "I survived Bengal tigers and New York financiers. I believe I can manage a few ambitious mammas." "It's not the mammas I'm concerned about," Thomas muttered. "It's their 20-year-old daughters with their simpering and fan-fluttering." The carriage halted before an imposing townhouse blazing with light. As they entered the grand foyer, Frederick was immediately struck by the opulence, crystal chandeliers, arrangements of hothouse flowers, and the gentle strains of a string quartet floating down from the ballroom above. "Lord Fairmont, how delightful!" Lady Sefton herself approached, an impressive figure in purple silk. "We had quite given up hope of seeing you in London. Do allow me to introduce you to some of our guests." What followed was a blur of names and faces. Frederick maintained his polite smile through introductions to no fewer than 14 young ladies, each more aggressively charming than the last. By the time the dancing began, he had already declined 3 invitations to country estates and skillfully avoided 2 attempts to trap him alone on the terrace. "You see?" Thomas murmured as they watched the first quadrille form. "Precisely as I predicted." Frederick was about to reply when he noticed her, a striking woman in blue standing alone near a marble column. Unlike the débutantes who eagerly watched the dance floor, she seemed determined to be overlooked, despite her elegant appearance and the unmistakable quality of her jewels. "Who is that?" he asked. Thomas followed his gaze. "Ah, the Duchess of Westmorley. Lady Zara Kensington. Beautiful, is she not? And one of the wealthiest women in England. If she's so eligible, why does she stand alone?" Thomas lowered his voice. "There's a story there. Had some accident during her debut, made a spectacle of herself. Never danced again, from what they say. Now she's known as—" "Don't tell me," Frederick interrupted, disliking the gossip. I prefer to form my own impressions. Something about her solitary dignity called to him. While others whirled and chattered, she observed with quiet intelligence. Frederick decided then that he would make her acquaintance, properly, with no reference to whatever rumors circulated about her. Zara had positioned herself strategically, as always, visible enough to satisfy social obligation, but sufficiently removed to discourage most interaction. From her vantage point, she could observe the entire ballroom while sipping her negus and nodding occasionally to passing acquaintances. "Such a pity," came a voice from behind a nearby potted palm. Zara recognized Lady Huntley's nasal tones immediately and stiffened. "Indeed," replied her companion. "A duchess who can't dance. All that fortune and those estates, yet she stands like a wallflower. My Frederick would never have tolerated such embarrassment. Is that why he died so young?" Lady Huntley tittered. To escape her awkwardness. The casual cruelty stung, though Zara had heard worse. Her brief marriage at 20 to the elderly Duke of Westmorley had been one of convenience. He had needed her substantial dowry, she had needed escape from her mother's increasingly desperate attempts to see her wed. That he had died 3 months after their wedding had surprised no one but created a fresh wave of gossip. The dancing disaster was now a wealthy widow, independent and unapproachable. "Your Grace." A deep voice startled her from her thoughts. "I believe we haven't been introduced." Zara turned to find herself looking up into the face of a tall gentleman with warm hazel eyes and chestnut hair that curled slightly at his temples. His expression held neither pity nor the usual predatory interest of fortune hunters. "Lord Fairmont, at your service." He bowed correctly. "I've only recently returned to England." "The Duchess of Westmorley," she replied with a slight inclination of her head. "How fortunate that you've been spared our dreadful weather these past seasons, my lord." The weather in Bengal was considerably more dramatic, though perhaps less inclined to social commentary. His eyes twinkled, and Zara found herself almost smiling, a rare occurrence in such settings. "You've been in India?" "On business or pleasure?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Both, in their way. My family has shipping interests there. Though I found unexpected pleasure in the architecture and literature." He gestured toward 2 passing servants. "Might I fetch you a fresh drink, Your Grace?" "No, thank you." Zara paused as the orchestra began a new piece. The opening strains of a waltz filled the air, and she felt her body tense involuntarily. Lord Fairmont noticed. Something in his expression shifted, not to pity, but to a kind of gentle understanding that disarmed her. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" Zara froze. No one had asked her to dance in years. Society knew better. Even fortune hunters limited themselves to conversation, never daring to invite public humiliation. "I don't dance," she said automatically, the words practiced and firm. "A pity," he replied. "Neither do I, with any particular skill. We might create a spectacle together." His frankness startled her. "You mock me, sir." "Never." His eyes held steady. "I simply thought you might enjoy the music more directly than from this column. But I would never presume to make you uncomfortable." A strange sensation flooded Zara's chest. This man didn't know her story. He saw only a duchess standing alone, not the embarrassment of a decade past. For one wild moment, she considered accepting. "Perhaps another time," she said finally, her voice softer than intended. Lord Fairmont smiled, no disappointment visible in his expression. "I shall hold you to that promise, Duchess." As he bowed and withdrew, Zara realized she was clutching her fan so tightly her knuckles had whitened. More unsettling was the realization that she had actually considered dancing, something she had sworn never to do again. "You did what?" Thomas exclaimed the next morning as they rode through Hyde Park. "Ask the Duchess of Westmorley to dance?" "Good God, Fairmont, you might as well have asked Queen Victoria herself to turn cartwheels." Frederick guided his bay gelding around a puddle. "She declined, as you might expect. But I found our conversation refreshing. No manufactured giggles or strategic fainting. She's considered quite formidable, you know. Manages her estates personally, sits on the boards of several charitable organizations. They say she reduced Lord Pemberton to tears during a disagreement about tenant housing. Frederick's interest only increased. A woman of substance, then. Not merely fortune. You cannot be serious about pursuing her, Thomas said, alarmed. She's notorious for rejecting suitors. Even turned down the Marquis of Stillwell last season, and he's considered quite the catch. I'm not pursuing anyone, Frederick replied mildly. Merely expressing appreciation for an intelligent conversation partner. But as they continued their ride, Frederick found his thoughts returning to the Duchess's guarded blue eyes and the moment when genuine curiosity had briefly replaced her careful reserve. There was a story there, one he found himself increasingly eager to discover. 3 days later, Zara sat in her library reviewing estate accounts when her butler entered. Lord Fairmont to see you, Your Grace. He brings these. Zara looked up, startled, as Hannah arranged a beautiful bouquet of exotic flowers on a side table. The vibrant blooms seemed to illuminate the somber room with their unusual shapes and colors. Show him in, Phillips, she said, removing her reading glasses and smoothing her day dress. Frederick entered with a bow, his tall figure somehow making the spacious library seem smaller. Your Grace, I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, she replied, indicating he should sit. Though I confess your visit is unexpected. As are most worthwhile things in life. He settled into a chair. I saw these flowers at a botanical exhibition and thought of our conversation about India. These orchids grow wild there, considered common, yet they'd be treasured here for their uniqueness. The sentiment wasn't lost on Zara. They're beautiful. Thank you for thinking of me, though it wasn't necessary. Necessary things are rarely satisfying, he observed, glancing appreciatively at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. You have an impressive collection. My father's passion. I've continued it. She hesitated, then added, do you read Sanskrit? There's a volume of poetry my father acquired, I've been searching for someone to translate it properly. Frederick's face lit up. I learned some during my time in Bengal. Not fluent, but perhaps enough to assist. For the next hour, they sat at her desk, heads bent over the ancient text, Frederick slowly translating passages about rivers and mountains, gods and mortals. Zara found herself relaxing in his company, their conversation flowing naturally between literature, travel, and even estate management. You've accomplished remarkable improvements at Westmorley, he commented. The agricultural innovations you've implemented are quite forward-thinking. She raised an eyebrow. You've researched my estates, Lord Fairmont. I make it a point to know something of those who interest me, he replied simply. The directness of his statement caught her off guard. And why should I interest you? London has no shortage of eligible ladies without complications. Frederick met her gaze steadily. Perhaps complications are what make a person worthy of interest. The grandfather clock chimed, breaking the moment. Zara realized with surprise that they had spent nearly 2 hours in conversation that had felt like minutes. I've taken too much of your time, Frederick said, rising. Might I call again? There are several more passages I believe you'd find fascinating. Against her better judgment, Zara nodded. Yes, I'd like that. As Phillips showed him out, Hannah returned to the library, eyeing the flowers with undisguised curiosity. Shall I move these to your private sitting room, Your Grace? Zara touched one of the delicate petals. No. Leave them here. I rather like seeing them. Frederick's visits became a regular occurrence over the following weeks. They discussed books, debated philosophy, and examined maps of places they had both traveled. Never once did he mention dancing or seek to touch her, maintaining a respectful distance that paradoxically drew her closer. By his 5th visit, rumors had begun to circulate. The Morning Post noted that a certain recently returned earl has been seen frequently calling upon a notably reclusive duchess. Zara ignored the gossip, as was her custom, but found herself looking forward to their conversations in a way that both pleased and alarmed her. During one such visit, as spring rain tapped against the library windows, Frederick noticed a pianoforte in the corner. "Do you play, Your Grace?" "I did, once," Zara admitted. "Before?" She didn't finish, but Frederick nodded as though understanding. "Would it trouble you if I played?" "Music often helps me think." To her surprise, he seated himself at the instrument and began to play, not with professional skill, but with genuine feeling. The melody was simple yet haunting, filling the room with melancholy beauty. "That's lovely," she said when he finished. "What is it?" "A folk song I learned in the mountains north of Calcutta. The locals say it tells of a bird who refused to fly after falling from its nest, until a storm forced it to remember its wings." The metaphor wasn't subtle, but neither was it unkind. For the first time, Zara felt someone understood her fear without judging it. "Lord Fairmont," she began. "Frederick, please," he interrupted gently. "At least when we're not in company." "Frederick," she tested the name. "I'm Zara." His smile warmed her more than the fire crackling in the grate. 2 days later, a letter arrived bearing Frederick's seal. Zara opened it over breakfast, expecting perhaps a poem or passage he had translated for her. Instead, she read, "My dear Zara, I write with regret that I must leave London unexpectedly. My estate in Derbyshire requires urgent attention due to severe flooding. I do not know how long I will be absent, but please know that our conversations have been the brightest part of my return to England. Yours faithfully." Frederick. Zara reread the brief message, surprised by the sharp disappointment she felt. In just a few weeks, Frederick had somehow become a fixture in her carefully ordered life, an anticipated pleasure rather than an obligation to be endured. "Is everything all right, Your Grace?" Hannah asked, noticing her expression. "Yes, quite," Zara replied, folding the letter. "Lord Fairmont has been called to Derbyshire. Estate matters. How unfortunate. He seemed a genuine gentleman." The observation hung in the air. Yes, Frederick was genuine, unlike the calculating suitors who had pursued her fortune or the society matrons who invited her to gatherings only to whisper behind their fans. His interest seemed untainted by either pity or advantage. That evening, Zara found herself restless, wandering to the pianoforte and tentatively playing the melody Frederick had taught her. The note stirred something long dormant, a remembrance of who she had been before fear and public humiliation had reshaped her life. 2 weeks passed without word. Zara attended necessary functions and managed her affairs, but the library seemed emptier, the days longer. She caught herself watching the door whenever Phillips entered, hoping for another letter. When she attended Lady Prescott's musical evening, whispers followed her as usual. This time, however, she overheard a new strain of gossip. "Lord Fairmont has been seen frequently in the company of Miss Eliza Morton in Derbyshire," Lady Huntley said loudly enough to carry. "Her father owns adjacent lands. A most convenient arrangement. And more suitable than pursuing a duchess who cannot even stand up for a country dance," her companion added with a meaningful look toward Zara. The words shouldn't have hurt, she had endured worse, yet they did. Had Frederick's attentions been merely a passing diversion until something more convenient presented itself? Had she imagined the genuine connection between them? The next morning brought a letter from her estate manager at Westmorley reporting storm damage to the tenant cottages. Grateful for the distraction, Zara made immediate arrangements to travel to her country estate in Hertfordshire, leaving London and its gossip behind. Westmorley Hall embraced Zara with familiar comfort. Here, surrounded by the legacy her father had entrusted to her, she felt most herself. For a week, she immersed herself in repairs, meeting with tenants, and planning improvements to prevent future storm damage. On her 8th day at Westmorley, she rode out to inspect the repaired cottages. The spring afternoon was mild, the countryside vibrant with new growth. As she returned through the estate's extensive grounds, she noticed a rider approaching on the main drive, a familiar figure on a bay gelding. "Frederick!" Zara reined in her mare, heart suddenly racing. He rode directly toward her, and as he drew nearer, she could see he looked weary, as though he had traveled hard. Zara, he called, dispensing with formality as he dismounted. Thank God. I went to London first, then followed when your staff said you'd come here. Why such urgency? She asked, remaining on her horse, maintaining the distance that had always protected her. Frederick stepped closer, his expression serious. Because I heard the rumors. About Miss Morton and myself. Your personal affairs are not my concern, she said stiffly. They are when they're fabricated to cause you pain. He reached for her horse's bridle, steadying the animal. Eliza Morton is engaged to my estate manager. I was helping arrange suitable housing for them after the floods damaged his cottage. Nothing more. Relief washed through her, followed by shame at how quickly she had doubted him. I see. Do you? He asked quietly. Do you see that I've thought of little else but you since we met? That every conversation, every moment in your company has only confirmed what I suspected that first night, that you are extraordinary, Zara Kensington, not despite your caution but because of how you've transformed it into strength. The intensity of his words overwhelmed her. No one had ever spoken to her thus, as though her fear were not a flaw but a challenge she had mastered. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll dance with me, he said simply. Zara stared at him, certain she had misheard. Here? Now. Here. Now. No audience, no judgment. Just music. From his pocket, he produced a small music box. Setting it on a nearby stone wall, he opened it, and a gentle melody emerged, the same folk song he had played for her. I can't, she whispered, the old terror rising. Frederick, please don't ask this of me. I'm not asking you to perform, he said gently. I'm asking you to trust me. One dance, Zara. Then, if you wish me to leave forever, I shall. She dismounted slowly, hands trembling slightly as he secured her horse beside his. The music box played on, its sweet notes filling the quiet countryside. Frederick extended his hand, not moving closer, allowing her to choose. Zara looked at his open palm, then at his face, patient, kind, waiting without demand. Taking a deep breath, she placed her fingers in his. His other hand settled respectfully at her waist as he began to guide her in a simple waltz pattern. At first, she moved stiffly, counting steps in her head as she had been taught all those years ago. But gradually, the feel of the spring grass beneath her riding boots and the warm strength of Frederick's hand steadying her began to ease her rigid posture. You see, he murmured. You're dancing, Duchess. And she was. Not perfectly, not with practiced grace, but with increasing confidence as they turned slowly in the dappled sunlight beneath an ancient oak tree. No watching eyes, no whispers, no judgment, only the music and Frederick's encouraging smile. When the melody ended, he didn't release her immediately, and Zara realized she didn't want him to. For the first time in 12 years, she had danced, and the world hadn't ended. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For seeing me as I could be, not as I was. Frederick's expression grew serious. Zara, I came to Westmorley today not just to dispel rumors, but with a purpose. These weeks away from you confirmed what I already knew. He took both her hands in his. I love you, your intelligence, your courage, your compassion for others. I love how you've built a life of meaning despite society's cruelty. Zara felt lightheaded, scarcely believing his words. Frederick, let me finish, please, he continued. I know we've known each other only a short time, but I've lived enough to recognize what matters. I don't care if you never dance in public again. I don't care what anyone whispers or prints. I care only for your happiness and the privilege of sharing it. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. Zara Kensington, Duchess of Westmorley, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears blurred Zara's vision. For so long, she had believed her humiliation had defined her future, that she was the Duchess who never danced, forever constrained by a single moment of clumsiness and the cruelty that followed. But looking at Frederick, she saw a different possibility, a life where the past informed but did not dictate her choices. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Yes, Frederick. I will marry you. He rose and gathered her gently into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent. When they parted, the music box had long since stopped playing, but Zara could still hear the melody in her heart. Their wedding 3 months later was small by aristocratic standards. Family and close friends gathered at the ancient chapel on the Westmorley estate. Zara wore ivory silk with pearl embroidery, her dark hair adorned with orange blossoms and a single perfect orchid like those Frederick had first brought her. The wedding breakfast that followed was elegant but intimate. As the small orchestra began to play, Frederick approached his bride and bowed formally. "Your Grace," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "might I have this dance?" The room quieted, guests exchanging knowing glances. Everyone had heard the stories, everyone expected her to decline. Instead, Zara placed her hand in his. "It would be my pleasure, Lord Fairmont." A collective gasp rose as he led her to the center of the floor. Zara felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, but Frederick's steady gaze anchored her. As the waltz began, she remembered their dance beneath the oak tree and the freedom she had found there. They moved together in perfect harmony, her ivory skirt swirling as they turned. There was no stumble, no disaster, only the joy of movement and music shared with the man she loved. When the dance ended, spontaneous applause erupted from their guests. "Well done, Duchess," Frederick murmured as he escorted her from the floor. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, squeezing his hand. The next day's Morning Post carried the notice, "Society stunned as Duchess of Westmorley waltzes at own wedding." But for once, Zara didn't mind the attention. Let them write what they would, she was no longer the Duchess who never danced. She was simply Zara Xavier, a woman who had found, in love's patient understanding, the courage to begin again.